Hello, and welcome to Shake It Up. In today's session, we're going to discover ways that we can take a lesson plan and shake it up to make it even better and more impactful for our learners. So that way, we're not just wasting instructional moments, but we're actually using that time to engage and to use all of the different lesson components to make the learning even more sticky. Right here is a Cami link. I would love for you to go ahead and join this link. This is going to take you to this document right here where you will be able to collaborate and see the resources right in this document. So again, here is the link. You might want to pause the video so that way you can go type it into your computer and then come back and hit play. So again, we're going to learn how to shake it up. So again, here's that link. Feel free to pause the video so that way you can type this link into your browser. So first, let's go ahead and look at what is a lesson plan, right? And this document right here, you're going to be able to take this and make a copy it will help you kind of plan out or take notes throughout today's session. So again, I'm going to put a link over on the side. I'm going to use the comment feature. So that way, if you want to use this resource to take notes, you're more than welcome to do so. So again, I'm going to go ahead and share this resource. And you will be able to make a copy of it if you would like to. And again, this can be your resource for you to take notes and to kind of dive in or even think about how you might want to use this in your own classroom. All right. So the first piece when we're looking at this lesson plan framework is we have the big picture. Okay, so when it comes to the big picture, this is your essential question. How are you going to kind of engage your learners when it comes to that big picture? Then we want to talk about the objectives. What is the main focus that you really want your learners to focus in during the time that they are learning this new learning? This is where you're going to grab your standards and really start to make those connections. What can you do to engage your learners? How can you make it stickable? How can we use retrieval practices to help students retain that information? How are we able to provide differentiation? And the last one is assessment. How can we test to see that we know our students have gotten that information, have mastered that information? So this again is kind of the formation of how we're going to start to shake it up with our lesson plan. We're going to dive deep into each of these 6 different areas so that we can have resources for our students that are impactful for their learning. So the first area is that big picture. This again is that essential question. Objective, we're going to be talking about lesson goals. Engagement, how are we going to engage our learners to be excited about this new learning? Stickability, how are we going to make it stick for our students? Differentiation, how are we going to allow our students to access that learning at their own need or where their own background knowledge might be? And then assessments, how do you plan to demonstrate their learning? So let's go ahead and let's start with the big picture. So when it comes to the big picture, right here is a resource. This is going to take you to a Google slide. I personally love to open this up in Cami because as I'm lesson planning, I'm able to use Cami to support me, and I'm able to come in here and provide what is my essential question going to be and what am I going to use with this new learning. So let's go ahead and let's kind of think out what this might look like with this generator. How do we come up with a really great essential question, right? How do we hook our students? A lot of times if I am teaching, I will use my essential question as kind of that summative piece of a writing prompt or a summative piece for whatever I am kind of teaching. So we kind of want to think about what are the themes that we really want our students to be learning about? What are those themes that take place within a story, right? Within maybe a science experience, within a math lesson, right? What are those themes that we really kind of have within our context? So for example, maybe you're reading The Outsiders, right? What are some themes that might take place when we're reading The Outsiders? What are the themes that, again, kind of happen within that story? And so again, I'm going to just maybe pause and think about your subject and maybe what books you're reading, and think about what are those themes when we're kind of creating this lesson. So when I think about outsiders, right, there's class conflict. So I'm just going to grab real quick the text box, and I'm just going to put class conflict. I'm also going to make this just a little bit smaller so that way we can fit a little bit more on here. There's also a lot about friendship in the story, right? We also have search for family. That's a huge theme within this book. We also have maybe, students with violence. There's a lot of violence that takes place within this story. And that self-discovery is another big theme. And identity, I would say, as well. Okay, so now that I have those themes kind of listed here, I now want to think about what lesson do I want my students to learn as they learn this material, right? So what is the lesson that I want my students to learn by reading The Outsiders? So again, you might want to kind of pause and think about whatever your subject is. So for me, what I want my students to learn is I might want them to learn understanding, right? Understanding of the social divides and understanding other people's perspectives and point of views, right? The impact on social class, right? The consequences of violence. And then maybe the importance of friendship. Right? Perspective is really important for them to learn. So again, I just did a quick brain dump. The themes of what I'm about to teach and the lessons that I really want my students to learn, right? And so now I need to kind of use my checklist. Are my students going to be required with evidence, right? When I'm creating this essential question, I'm going to go ahead and kind of look at what is it that I had my students brainstorm here, or that I brainstorm. And this is maybe my essential question, right? What is the value of being an individual? How will this concept learn through the study of the outsiders, right? So that's kind of my essential question. What is the value of being an individual? And how, right? How is this concept learned through the study of the outsiders? So my students are going to be providing evidence because, and let me go ahead and grab my drawing tool, because they are going to be having to use the study of the outsiders. Okay. My students, are they encouraged to analyze different perspectives, right? They're going to be looking at the value of individual. They're going to have to determine, right, those different perspectives of being an individual, right? And how it's learned through the outsiders with those social classes. Are my students able to create thoughtful connections as they justify? So they're going to need to also create those connections as well. And will this question spark debate, right? I think it's going to. So again, I love to use this checklist after I form my question to really help me make sure I am on target and my students will be successful in their learning. So again, I'm going to go back up here to this page and I'm just going to put a text box. We came up with our essential question. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. And that part of the lesson is done, right? And so now I'm ready to kind of think about my objectives. So when it comes to my objectives, I really love to use these roadmaps. And with these roadmaps, I'm able to have different activities where I can focus on those objectives. So here's an example of a roadmap. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to make a copy of this roadmap so that we can use it for the outsiders. I always love to start creating in Google Slides, but then I'm going to take this over to Kami to make it more interactive for my learners. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this roadmap for you, and I'm just going to set it right here on page number 2 if you want to take a look or make a copy yourself. So again, we have our essential question first. So I'm going to go ahead and just take this essential question and I'm going to paste it right here on this first slide. Okay, this is kind of our focus. We really want to know, what is the value of being an individual, right? What is it that this concept maybe is being learned throughout the outsiders? Okay, so I've got my essential question and I might actually put it right here. Because by the end of this, my students might use it for a debate, or my students might use it to really learn and to take their knowledge to that next level. They might even use it in an essay or a project, right? Okay, so now that we have that added right onto this page, we're ready to kind of, again, come up with our objectives. I love to use do nows for our objectives. A do now is a place for students to put their name. They add the date. They put what they're working on so they can let me know which number activity these students are working on. I also have a today's goal. And so with this today's goal, this is where I can add in the outsiders and come up with lesson objectives. So let me go ahead and find my lesson objectives for the outsiders. And again, what I kind of maybe want my students to do is to identify and analyze the major themes, right, of the outsiders. So that might be one way that I kind of get them to focus on those goals for the day, right? And so again, that might be one focus. Another focus is where I really want them to examine the development and the motivations of maybe key characters within that story. I might want my students to develop different perspectives within those classes and in the characters. I also want my students to understand maybe the economic status of individuals within that area. So again, I'm coming up with my standards. I'm looking over what is it that my students need to know within maybe 7th grade. And then I want to have them type in that goal for today. Okay, so again, I'm going to be looking over what is the goal for the day, and they will fill out this sheet every single day to kind of help in with those objectives and that focus for the answers. And so again, I can have my students come in and really kind of think about those goals, what I want them to do, right? So for example, in Ohio, we use Common Core. And so I'm going to have my students use RL 7.1, where they're going to cite several pieces of textual evidence to support the analysis of the text, right? So that might be a goal that I really focus on for this activity. Another one that I might want them to do is determine a theme, right? 7.2, where they're looking over a theme and developing that course. I might also want them to analyze certain elements of a story. I also might want them to include different words or phrases that are used in the text and kind of think about the meaning of those words, right? So again, I'm going back to my essential question, and I'm also going to tie that kind of with the learning goal for the day. So today we're going to cite several pieces of textual evidence. So again, I love to use these do nows to support that learning, where my students are going to come in. They maybe create their own goal. I will, cite several pieces of textual evidence. They come in and they are able to use Cami to highlight where they're at on the roadmap. Are they on pace, ahead of pace, or not on pace? And then what strategies do they need to support their learning? I can also use these zones to let me know how they're feeling. And then I can check these assignments right here to see if there's anything that they want to share with their teacher. And so now that we have our essential question, let me go ahead and make this again a little bit smaller. And we also have our learning objective, right? We're using the curriculum. We're using our standards from 7.1. I'm going to go ahead and add that right there for us to have handy, just so we can kind of follow along throughout this process. Okay, now we're ready for the engagement piece. So now that we have our essential question, we have our standard, we're now ready for that engagement. And so when it comes to engagement, right here is a resource that you can use to support you. This is an instructional playbook. And so I'm able to come in here and kind of think about the instructional strategy that's best going to support this learning goal. And so, for example, I want to, again, have my students with 7.1 cite several pieces of evidence to support that text, right? When they're kind of going through and they're looking at that essential question on our assignment. So what is the value of being an individual, right? What is that? So I want, again, my students to really go in and think about that. I could do a really great classroom discussion, right? I could have effective questioning. I could have my students go through maybe feedback or summarization. And so again, I'm able to use a lot of these different resources that are in this hub to support me and my learners. So again, I kind of want you to just take a pause, look at this resource, okay? You're going to pause this video a lot, and I want you to look at this resource and think about your essential question. Look at your objectives for the lesson as well, and what activities will best suit that resource. And so again, this little hub can support you along the way. If you click on this hyperlink right here, it's going to take you to a one-pager. This one-pager is going to support you with the ISTE standards. It's also going to support you with the summary of research for why this strategy is really great to use for students, okay? So what activities should we maybe use with the outsiders, right? And so again, I want you to pause and I want you to think and search through this activity. You can just click on it on this page. You'll click on it and you'll be able to open up this spreadsheet. So what activities should we use with the outsiders to help support, right? We want to help support the answer when it comes to our essential question, but also with that standard, okay? So again, pause that video, take a look at those resources on that spreadsheet as you're developing your engagement activities for your students, okay? And this on my roadmap might take a couple boxes, right? I could have my students watch a video. I could have them do a practice. I could have them create a video as well. So again, there's a lot of different activities that I could do with my students as they're reading this book. So what I am going to do is I am going to have maybe my students do a character identifying, analysis where they might have a character, and I also might use the jigsaw method. So right here is the jigsaw method. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and type in here. We're going to do a character identity. Okay, and so for this activity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these activities that I have here. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all of those. And I'm going to create maybe a table. Let's go ahead and create a table, because with a jigsaw, what happens is you have students that are going to break off into other subgroups. And so with those subgroups, they're going to come back and they're going to teach the other students about what they just learned. So we have Pony Boy. We have Johnny, right? So here are the 4 characters we have, just because that's how many students I have in my group to make this a little bit easier, right? So again, I'm going to divide my students into small groups, and they're all going to be assigned a character. So I'm going to go ahead and assign my students those different characters. Each group is then going to create a detailed character profile, right? So I'm going to put, actually, I do need that box that I just got rid of. Insert one left, and we're going to do character profile. And then what I also want, this is going to maybe include my character traits, my motivators, and key moments that highlight their individuality. Okay. I also want to have my students provide textual evidence, right? So I want them to find and cite that evidence for each of those different relationships. And then once they kind of have their note sheet, I could have an extension where they create some type of presentation with these resources, right? So I'm going to go ahead and make this just a tad smaller, the font, right, for my students to fill this out. And then again, I will give time for my students to work in their jigsaw groups to really learn about their characters. And then they're going to go back and share what they found about their characters in that chapter. I like to click on here and I'm going to go ahead and hyperlink. This is going to go to slide number 3. Okay. So now I can decide if I need another engaging activity for my students, right? And so now, again, I need to kind of think through and really think about, okay, what else do I want my students to work on and to complete and to do, right? And so after they do that jigsaw activity, I'm then going to have them do the value of being an individual. Okay, so I've got this next part where I really want them to have a discussion. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this slide, and I'm actually going to get probably rid of this table. And I'm going to go ahead and just add a text box right here, and I'm going to talk about the value of being an individual. And I want my students to take notes. Okay, this is going to be their note sheet for this activity where they're going to come on here and they're going to have a discussion as a class. Okay, so again, they're going to have already read certain chapters and passages that really highlighted the student's individuality. And now what I want them to do is I want them to find maybe quotes. So I'm going to go ahead in here and I'm going to come in here and make this text box and I'm going to put find quotes. Okay, so that might be one area where I want my students to take notes on, where they're, again, kind of using those notes to support their learning. And then I want them to answer certain questions, right? So there's going to be questions that we're going to be talking about within the discussion. And I'm not going to post them just yet because I want to show you something really cool as I would teach this lesson, what would be pulled and how I can support my students' learning in real time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put my questions that I have for this activity. There's going to be 3, but I'm going to hide them in the speaker notes, okay? So again, I have my quotes. My students are going to discuss in that seminar, and I'm going to, again, encourage students to use their textual evidence to support their learning as we're going through the book and as we're kind of sharing. And then after they do that, so I'm going to have my questions probably here. I'm going to also want my students to reflect. Okay, so I'm going to have them reflect on that seminar as well. I like to come up here and I like to come into arrange and I like to align. I can align them all to be distributed certain ways. So that way it's all perfect. I can also align so everything is perfectly aligned at the top as well. Okay. So now that I have my value of being an individual, we are now ready for that next step. Okay. Our next part of our learning is the stickability. We want to make sure that we use some of our retrieval practices. We want to make this learning sticky. And so right here is a bunch of different YouTube videos that I can use to support my students with remembering and that retrieval practice. So again, right here, I've got the do now, the character, the value, and now I want to come up with that last piece where I really want my students to be able to retrieve what they just learned, right? And so what I'm going to have my students do is I'm going to then maybe have them do this ABC retrieval practice. So I'm going to go ahead and find that template that I have. And on this resource, I'm going to be able to do this ABC, this alphabet retrieval practice with my students, okay? So again, when it comes to retrieval, you're having your students do a brain dump of everything that they just learned. This is going to be extremely beneficial to them to be able to come out and kind of brain dump what was taking place, during their character identity. And then when they had that discussion, what was being taken place too. So I need to go ahead and hyperlink this to slide 4. And then again, I'm going to find that alphabet. It's in my drive somewhere, activity. So I want you to think about, again, you might pause this video as you're brainstorming. What is it that you can use for your retrieval practice? What is it that your students can really think about when it comes to to their learning and what is it that they're able to do. Let's see if this will copy and paste okay, or if I might need to resize it. Okay, so again, I'm going to have my students draw the alphabet. They're in each of these different boxes. They're going to have to draw something that matches with that letter. So again, let me just make these a little bit bigger for my students to complete this activity to help their learning. Okay, so again, they're going to draw the alphabet. Again, it's just a quick retrieval practice activity for them to kind of capture and reflect on what they did. I could have my students complete number 5, slide 5, all by themselves, or they could do it together. But basically, when it comes to this activity, my students are going to come in, and in each of these different boxes, they're going to draw something that helps them remember in the outsiders. Okay, so in each box, draw something that matches the letter and goes along with the story, the outsiders we just learned about. Okay, so again, they're going to come in, they're going to have to think of different words. So maybe A is like an alley, B might be brotherhood, F might be family, right? So they have to come in and draw quick pictures for each of those different things. And then for some of my students, I'm going to differentiate because our next piece of our learning is differentiation. So we're going to walk through how do I differentiate this lesson for my students and my learners. So now that I have created this assignment, I'm also going to skip real quick. I know assessment is last, but I'm going to show you why I'm going to skip that just so I can finish up this roadmap. So right here, I'm going to have my students do some type of activity. And a lot of these assignments or summative assessments are problem-based learning resources. However, they can be used for this same summative assessment piece to allow me to check my understanding for my students. So what I'm going to do here, instead of a teacher check, I'm actually going to do a podcast. So I want my students to come in and I want them to create a podcast episode. I could also provide choice for my students, right? Let me see if I can find a better podcast template that I have in my Google Drive as well. And so again, I want my students to come in. I want them to do a quick podcast episode recording of what they just learned. Again, instead of just a podcast, I could have my students do something else with these different products. So again, there's a ton of different ideas and resources. It's also not just limited to these. You could have your students create a game. You could have your students, do a quick summative assessment, right? But I want my students to create a podcast, and here might be the notes that they use. So they're going to come up with the title, episode, what is the main message that the podcast episode, and then here's where I really want to change it because that was used for a different template. So see how I rinse and repeat a lot of these resources for other projects, right? So I want them to, what is the value of being an individual? Because again, I want to use that essential question to help engage, but also to help my students. Textual evidence. And so again, I want my students to come in and use those resources. Maybe I do, what obstacles do you face when dealing with individuality, right? And so again, pause the video, think about what is it that you can have your students do. I want facts about individuality. Another perspective, that one can stay, right? How can I make this podcast pop? Okay, perfect. So again, I have my notes that I want my students to complete here. And so what I'm going to have my students do is create their own little podcast episode about this topic. Again, I like to sometimes create choice, but for today, we're just going to do one area for my students to complete. And now that I have this activity done, I am ready to share this activity to my students. So I'm going to hop on over and I'm going to go ahead and open up this account. And I'm going to go to Google Classroom. And you can use multiple different learning management skills or management to support your students in their learning with this activity. So again, I'm going to show with Google Classroom. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go to classwork. And when I go to classwork, I'm going to hit create. And with create, I'm going to create a Kami assignment. Okay, so again, classwork, create a Kami assignment. It's going to load that assignment, and I'm now ready to write the outsiders, right? And I'm going to choose my Google Drive, and I'm going to find that resource in my drive. I'm going to go to recent because it should be one of the most recent activities that I just assigned. It's going to attach that file. For today, I do want it to make a copy for every single one of my learners, just because it's, an activity that I want my students to individually practice. They are going to be working on that jigsaw, but I want them to individually take notes with that activity. Even though it is a group work, again, I want them to individually. So again, you're going to go to your learning management system. You'll want to assign this because I'm going to show you how Kami can support you when it comes to using your learning management with your students. Okay, so now that I've got that, I'm going to go ahead and hit assign. It's going to go ahead and assign that assignment for my students. And once it assigns, I will be able to open it up, and I'm going to show you what it looks like as the student view and what I used to do for my students so that they could complete these different activities within their classroom. Okay, so right now I've got this resource, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to open up my student account. And with my student account, I am going to come in, and they're going to go to their Google Classroom. And once I'm in my Google Classroom, I'm going to click on that class, go to classwork, and there it is. Students are going to open it up with Kami. And so now that I have my assignment here, students, I like to have them go to add media, and I love for my students to take a picture. And so my camera is pulling up over here, and then they can use this picture right on their board. And so again, I'm able to watch my students as they're working on this assignment by they're able to drag and drop their image along the roadmap. Students can come in, and again, they're able to highlight, draw, say, mark up, whatever they need to do with this assignment. Okay, so this student will say is ahead of pace. This student, maybe their goal, right, is to come in here. They're here. I can also have my students take notes right here. They're able to cite their textual evidence. They can add their quotes. They can draw their little family, draw their evidence, right, for this story and create their podcast. My students can record right into Kami, so they're able to create their podcast right into Kami. Now that I have my students completing some of that work, I'm going to go ahead and open up that assignment. And I'm going to click on View Instructions. And instead of viewing each of my students individually, I'm going to go over to Class View. When I click on Class View, instead of, again, viewing each student one by one, I can actually see my entire class at the exact same time. And so now I can come in and I'm able to provide that differentiation support to each of my students. Maybe student Haley is on an IEP. And so because of her IEP, she needs me to hide this activity, and she can't work on it until she gets a teacher check on her first activity. So once she completes number one, I can come in and I can remove this from her screen, and she will have access to this activity. Maybe student August needs the read aloud feature. Right here is a built-in read aloud, and the student can listen to the activity, and they can also change the speed, the pitch, or even the voice of that sound.
Goal today, RL.
Okay. I can come in and I can say, okay, I could set personalized goals for my students. So maybe our goal today is to get here. Or I can set a class goal. So I can come back in here and hit update work. Update work is going to allow me to publish updates to all of my learners. So here I am, I'm on my Kami document once it loads, and I'm able to come in and say, okay, this is what I need to do. All my students need to work on this assignment at this time. And so I'm going to come on, let's see if it loaded, refresh. And I can kind of use either a sticker or I can communicate the goal for the day using maybe the comment feature or creating audio or video directions for my learners. Okay, there we go. So now that I have my document up here, again, I could come in and say, okay, today our goal is to get to number 2. So that way, if my students are behind pace, they're able to mark that on this document. They know, okay, I'm supposed to be at number 2. I'm only at number 1 today. And so again, my students can come in, mark on that document to let me know, hey, I'm behind pace today. I can then focus on who I need to help catch up on that assignment. And so again, I could quickly send out to my learners, everybody needs this resource. That is my UDL button, that update work. ClassView is that personalized instruction resource where I'm able to come in and say, okay, this student needs this resource, so they're going to get it using ClassView. So again, there's a lot of different ways that I can support my students and my learners as I'm supporting them in their learning. So just a quick recap, ClassView is personalized, update work, it would go to every single one of my learners. Now, with this resource, remember how I didn't fill in the questions and I kept them in the Google slide. So if my students were discussing, I could individually add it over to their document. And again, my students are going to get this question live if they need that support or that visual. Another resource is I could use update work and send it out question by question to each of those students so that way they can get the support that they might need. So lots of different resources for those students to support their learning and to get it in real time. I can see on here as they're giving feedback, as they're working on their assignment. And if my students see me pop over feedback, they're going to get it on their screen as well. So when they open up that Kami assignment, they'll be able to see my feedback. I can give them a star, I can give them a check mark, whatever I need to do, and my students will see that resource automatically on their page. They don't need to refresh. They don't need to do anything in order to have that be updated for them. So again, ClassView is that way to provide that individualized feedback where this other way with the update template, update work, that's going to allow me to push up changes to all of my students in that class. Another great resource with this is our annotation bank. So right here is the annotation bank. It's this little box. And with this box, I can drag and drop scaffolds and maybe IEP accommodations to my students as they need it. So maybe, for example, this student really could have used the support of a graphic organizer. I can drop that down onto their paper. Where this student over here might have needed a manipulative or maybe a video or audio directions to support their learning. Again, I can drag and drop different resources based on what each individual student might need. I can also come in and add in timers if there's a timer that my student might need to take a quick 5-minute break. And I can use feedback, right, to ask my students, are you still processing? Have you got it? Where are you at? And so I can use GIFs and resources just like that within that annotation bank to support my students. So again, when we were covering this lesson, we were able to really develop all of the parts that really make this learning sticky. We have our essential question. We used our objectives. We also came in and provided engaging activities for our students to partake in. Students reflected and really made their learning sticky when it came to drawing that alphabet. Then students had a fun summative assessment where they were able to create their own podcast about the topic. So again, we were able to take each part of this lesson plan to really dive deep for the students to take place and to understand where we're coming from when it comes to that learning. And then we could use ClassView to support us. And so with ClassView, we were able to have our students either use ClassView where we could personalize their learning, or we were able to use update work where we could push out changes to all of our students all at the same time. So lots of great resources for you to explore and to think about how do you want to start creating sticky lessons for your own learners. So again, give it a shot and go ahead and try. And the last thing is I would love feedback. So if you wouldn't mind submitting some feedback, I would greatly appreciate it. So I'm going to put up here on this first page our link to a feedback form. You'll get a certificate of attendance as well. You'll click this link. Once you click it, fill out your name, your email. Today's session, we're going to go ahead and do, let's see here. Our topic is probably not on here, so let's just go ahead and pick on Cammie's latest and greatest. My name is Stephanie. So again, you're going to want to do latest and greatest. And then you're going to want to fill out these 4 areas and hit submit. Once you hit submit, you'll get a certificate of attendance as well. All right, so again, I'm going to put the session name, just so you can have it, is right there. And again, if you have any resources or if you have any questions, please reach out. I would love to support you. I'm also going to put my email right here if you need anything at all. If you do not have Cammie, reach out. We would love to support you and provide a free trial to you as well. So give ClassView a shot. Practice differentiating. Come up with how am I going to organize my lessons to really motivate my students, and what essential question am I going to use to support my students' learning. If you need the link again, it's right here. This will be available to you even after today's session. I absolutely loved learning with you and cannot wait to see how you shake up your learning as well.